involved in other aspects of government or management. And I think that that's probably the best part about this. When we get together for our UAC conferences, we're able to do kind of the brain trust and share information. But a lot of times, that information has a hard time filtering out to the rest of our organization. This is a wonderful opportunity to bring people together to give some of those situational awareness pieces you wouldn't otherwise get. One thing that I want to, never mind. Where's Leanne? Leanne, where are you at? Leanne, Leanne's going to be presenting, but if I could, for just 1 second, borrow you.
I don't like being put on the spot, Johnston.
I apologize, but this is important. Everyone, today is Leanne's birthday. So if we could just sing to her really quickly. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Leanne. Happy birthday to you.
I quit having birthdays.
She's now celebrating anniversaries of birthdays.
That's right.
No, we have a pretty good group working in HR, and so we like to take any opportunity to give each other a hard time.
Celebrate each other.
Celebrate each other. As we're getting started here today, we've got a good lineup. I do believe that we saw Jessica. Yes, we did. Yes, I thought I saw you. So, just want to give you a little bit of background on Jessica Johnston. She's a shareholder at Strong and Hanni PC. She mainly focuses her practice on employment law, construction contract, litigation, commercial litigation, and the Affordable Care Act. In her employment cases, Jessica helps to put the pieces together for business and government organizations facing discrimination suits. She loves the process involved in building a defense and explaining why a company or government branch took the actions they did towards an employee. The process often feels like putting together a puzzle and plays right into her love of problem solving. So, without any further ado, Jessica, the floor is yours. Oh, or maybe not. You need a couple minutes?
We just need to get the PowerPoint set up because the file.
Okay. Oh, sorry. As long as she's doing that, a couple of housekeeping items. Restrooms, if you need them, they are located basically down this hall, just right behind where this screen is here. And one last housekeeping item, if you do have a cell phone, we do know that we're all professionals here and need to take calls, but if you could put it on vibrate or something so that we don't disturb the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Sorry, everyone, we're having some technical difficulties with the fire.
While we're getting a couple of technical difficulties worked out, why don't we take a second and just go around the room and stand and introduce yourself so that we can start to get to know each other. And why don't we start over here with Melissa?
Okay. I'm Melissa Jurgensen. I'm the HR director with Duchesne County.
I'm Marcy Johnston, and I'm Melissa's new HR generalist for Duchesne County.
I'm Cynthia Wardle. I'm in Duchesne County. I work for the Sheriff's Office and I help out the HR and liaison.
I'm Jamie Park. I am the brand new Funeral and Benefits Administrator for Duchesne County.
I'm Tracy Randall, and I'm with Southeast Utah Health Department, and I do She really does too. I'm Joy from Central Utah Public Health Department. I'm the business manager. Excuse me. I'm Julie, and I'm Review County Assistant Human Resources Director. Holly Gleason, and I'm the Pine County Clerk Auditor.
Ginger McMullen, Beaver County Clerk Auditor. You can see Kelly and I wear multiple hats.
I'm Ralph Barnes. I'm the HR director for UCIP County.
Mark Brady, UCIP Lost Control. Oh, wait. Flashback. HR for Utah County.
I'm Craven, Human Resources for Benton County.
I'm Carly Lance, and I'm actually the Risk and Safety Manager for Davis County, but I'm a direct report to the HR Director, and I'm the designee to attend the call.
I'm Janet Stander. I'm the Boxelder County HR Director.
Gordon Young, I'm the Boxelder County Road Department Manager.
I'm Tom Durant, Washington County Assessor.
Walter Bird, San Juan County HR Director.
Danny Martin, Duchesne County's Library Director.
Brandon Chambers, Manager of Benefits and Engagement, Utah County.
Julie Nelgetta, Human Resource Analyst, Utah County.
I guess you know me, Leanne Wheeler, Sevier County HR Director.
Jessica Howell, Weaver Morgan Health Department Business Office Manager.
Brian Callen, I'm the Administration Director at Weaver Morgan Health Department.
David Rowley, I'm the Personnel Director from Wasatch County.
Brandon Ray, HR, Southwest Utah Public Health.
Amy Harrison, Clerk for Miller County. Monica Alvarado, Road Office Assistant.
Brenda Tuttle, Emory County Clerk Auditor.
Ralph Zimmerman, the Boxelder County Jail Manager.
I'm Carrie Powell-Smith, the Daggett County Auditor and Recorder.
Thank you. And I think we're ready to go, so it's all you.
Luckily, I had a backup PowerPoint from my original PowerPoint, which is on the same subject. I just added new slides.
My name is Jessica Johnston. As I was introduced, I am a partner at Strong and Hanni. We have an office in Salt Lake and in Sandy, and I am happy to be here. I love employment law. I picked this topic because it's obviously in the headlines all the time. I'm sure you saw that I look like I swallowed 1 million bowling balls. I'm 8 months pregnant, so if you see my ankles start to like swell, just ignore them. It's been happening a lot. So today we're going to talk about sexual harassment and retaliation in the workplace in the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement. So to start this out with, it's very important to note that this is not a law-driven movement. This is a social media, a media movement that's actually push towards changes in the law, which hasn't really happened in the past. To understand the Me Too movement, first we have to talk about what is sexual harassment as a legal concept and where does it come from. So first you have sex as a protected class. So this applies to companies with 15 or more employees, and under the Utah Anti-Discrimination Act, you have race, you have color, you have religion, you have gender, national origin, age, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, religious liberty, and pregnancy. Under the federal statute, which is mostly Title VII, you'll have race, color, religion. You also have gender, national origin, age, disability. Sexual orientation and gender identity are currently in the courts right now. They have not been fully decided if those are covered under Title VII yet. And then you have pregnancy as well. All right, so discrimination, federal and state law. Disparate treatment. It's treating someone differently because of their protected class. You are expected to make reasonable accommodations if someone comes to you and they have a disability or say they're of a certain religion that requires them. An example of this is the BYU beard card. If someone came in and they were Muslim and they needed to wear a beard as part of their religion, if this was a public organization, then you would need to give them an accommodation for that beard. And then pregnancy. So pregnancy is actually treated as a disability, which, you know, from day to day, I think of it that way lately. But you are expected to make the same accommodations for someone who is pregnant as you would for someone who is suffering that same injury as a disabled person. So say my back went out, then if you were going to give another employee that the doctor's note said that they can only lift 15 pounds or less, and I worked in the UPS office. Then if I was pregnant and had that same issue with my back going out, they would still have to give me that accommodation, even though technically I don't have a disability. So retaliation. Retaliation is retaliating against someone for complaining about potentially illegal activity or participating or assisting in the pursuit of a claim. So an example of this is someone comes to your department and they complain and you decide, this person is really annoying, they're making a lot of trouble, but they are complaining about something that's protected, and you decide to demote them. That's obviously retaliation. And then later, what came up is harassment. So harassment wasn't originally protected. Harassing someone because of their protected class. Sexual harassment in particular is where this comes up. You don't find a lot of cases in the system where someone's being harassed over their religion or something else, but it does come up with gender quite a bit. And then hostile work environment, which is a class in sexual harassment. So what is harassment? Unwelcome or unwanted conduct based on one or more of the protected classes. Quid pro quo. Does anyone know what that means?
This or that?
Okay, right. So if I came in and my boss said, I will give you a raise if you have sex with me, that's considered quid pro quo. Or severe or pervasive enough to alter the conditions of employment, creating a hostile work environment. This is where daily, if someone was constantly, talking about your appearance in a sexual context, if they were touching you constantly in an unwanted way that wasn't, just of the friendly nature, that would probably be enough to eventually get you to that pervasive if it was happening every day and constantly. It's conduct that unreasonably interferes with an individual's work, or conduct that creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. So, what is the defense to this? So you had a case that was the Farragher-Ellerth, and this created an affirmative defense, and this helps employers avoid liability for harassment. So what it is, it's available when the employer can prove that the employer exercised reasonable care to prevent and correct promptly any sexually harassing behavior, and the employee unreasonably failed to take advantage of any preventative or corrective opportunities provided by the employer. So this actually comes up all the time. When people file complaints with the EEOC, in the responses, one of our main defenses is always that they didn't take advantage of the system that was available to them. So, in their complaint, they're saying, the supervisor said this to me, he was always touching me, he talked about me being a single mother, etc., but they never told anyone. And so this defense is available to the employers, and it's very effective. So that's why policies are so important, because of this defense. All right, it only applies to hostile work environment situations. It does not apply to quid pro quo claims. So you cannot use this if the supervisor, wanted to exchange a raise for sexual activities. This would not be available. And it also applies only in situations where no tangible adverse employment action was taken against the plaintiff. So say, for example, that this activity was going on where the supervisor was being inappropriate, and the supervisor ended up terminating the employee or demoting, then we could not use this in our response for a discrimination claim. I'm trying to add my other PowerPoint in as we're talking, so if I look down here, it's because I'm doing that. Okay. So, before we get to this, let me ask you, what changed in 2017 to 2018 that started putting a focus on these kind of claims? Anyone have any ideas? Okay, I'll let you think about that for a second. So to take advantage of Farragher-Ellerth affirmative defense, employers should have policies prohibiting sexual harassment, obviously, including your policies multiple ways for an employee to actually report harassment, train your employees on the policies and how to report harassment, and investigate when there's a report, formal or informal, or they have knowledge of possible harassment. This wasn't a sexual harassment case, but it was a religious harassment case, and a former employer sent in an email stating, I left the company because the HR rep was, I guess she was anti-LDS. She was from, I'm not sure what religion, but when she came in, she made all the employees do this circle exercise where they wrote down what they felt like was impeding them in the ability to accomplish their goals. And she picked on this one male employee, and she started talking about how it was, his religion that was holding him back, it was his relationship with God that was holding him back, and she went on, and we even had text messages and email where she had sent him like videos, and she had passed out Bible cards, and this is I don't know, we were obviously very surprised that this was the HR director doing this. And it was a former employee, so we weren't as worried about a claim, but obviously for all the employees who were still working at the company, we wanted to make sure that that wasn't happening at all. So the company did launch an investigation and talked to other employees that had been named by the former employee, and we got it solved. But it's just an example of, the importance of investigating claims, even if it's from former employees, that might not hold as much of a legal threat against your company, but they might have a threat against everyone else that's working for your company. And then take action when you find harassment. A lot of times we have situations come up where it's someone very high up in the company that has done something wrong. And because they're so high up in the company, it's very hard to take action against them because they are important to the organization. And unfortunately, that's where we get into a lot of trouble. An example of this would be Matt Lauer. He was obviously a celebrity for that company, and there have been actions taking place for years, but because of his position in the company, it was very hard for them, I think, to take that step in what eventually happened. And you see that happen time and time again. Okay, so we're back to this question. What changed in the law over the past 2 years to create the Me Too and the Time's Up movement? And we talked about this a little bit, but does anyone?
I'd say President Trump.
You think it's President Trump?
He brought a lot of focus on it at least.
Okay, anyone else?
Harvey Weinstein.
Okay. Okay, so the answer is actually nothing. Nothing has really changed. Everything is the same, but the world has changed because of social perceptions and attitudes. And whoever said Harvey Weinstein, I think you can have. I brought some strong cane swag. I know that this is what you all wanted. Who said that? Student prizes. Okay, in October of 2017, the New York Times published an article about Harvey Weinstein and decades of sexual harassment against women in Hollywood. The floodgates opened, and social media made it very easy to make public accusations. So this case is actually very interesting in an insurance context because the current rumor is that Harvey has settled with his victims for $44 million. And guess who's paying that? It's all of his insurance policies. So we know that some of the people involved in the settlement have dropped out and have refused to take the money. But we know that 3 of the insurance companies didn't cover this because of certain policies. So we know Chubb's hasn't brought in any coverage. We know Travelers hasn't brought in any coverage. And I can't remember the third one. But it's been very interesting to see that, you know, the effect of $44 million is a lot to pay for an insurance company for an illegal action, right? Okay. So why did this happen? In recent years, studies showed that sexual harassment policies and training had not solved the problem. And sexual harassment hit a tipping point. Social movements, helped by social media, brought new attention to the problem. Notably, these movements include the Me Too and the Time's Up. The fact that hundreds of women were coming forward with accusations against powerful men emboldened other women to have the courage to also come forward. And here's some examples of celebrities that have been accused over the past 2 years. So what is Me Too? So it actually all started with a tweet. Very interesting, but Alyssa Milano, she said, if you've been sexually harassed or assaulted, write Me Too as a reply to this tweet. She wrote Me Too, and it took off like wildfire from there. So the term was actually first used in 2006 by gender equality activist Tarana Burke as a rallying cry for survivors of sexual harassment. And then when Alyssa Milano received the screenshot and put it on her Twitter account, overnight she got more than 30,000 responses. And we know, obviously, that it went far bigger than that, and you were seeing it everywhere. So Time's Up, this is actually mostly something that's happened within Hollywood. This is, well, the Me Too may have started with Hollywood. It's expanded into a more general comment on society for women in all fields. But the Time's Up movement really has started in Hollywood, and it's kind of stayed in Hollywood. So it shares a similar vision for women's empowerment, but has somewhat different goals. Started by a group of over 300 women. You might have remembered at the, I don't know if it was the Grammys or Oscars or something, that all the stars were wearing this black insignia on their outfits, and that was in support for Time's Up. It's been described as a solution-based, action-oriented next step in the Me Too movement, and it has a more political slant and it actually has money behind it, and they've created the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund. Okay, and then if everyone remembers who the person of the year was, it was these women that came forward. We had Harvey Weinstein, we had Taylor Swift with the groping incident, but all of these women were significant in bringing the movement forward with their stories. Okay, so how big of a problem is workplace harassment? A recent poll conducted by NBC News and the Wall Street Journal showed that 48% of currently employed women in the United States say that they have personally experienced an unwelcome sexual advance or verbal or physical harassment at work. An analysis by the Research Center found that women experience sexual harassment at nearly 3 times the rate men do at work. And women are projected to account for 51% of the increase in total labor force growth between 2008 and 2018. And they currently comprise at least 47% of the workforce. So it's anticipated that women will make up 50%. So she has a website that basically talks about all of this. You have hashtag mentor her. So this is a phenomenon that's obviously growing a lot. Almost half of male managers are uncomfortable participating in common work activities with women, such as mentoring, working alone, or socializing together. And almost 30% of male managers are uncomfortable working alone with a woman, which is more than twice as many as before. And the number of male managers who are uncomfortable mentoring women has more than tripled from 5% to 16%. That means that 1 in 6 male managers may now hesitate to mentor a woman. So questions I hear a lot, or comments I hear a lot, are, well, I'm just not going to invite her to lunch. And we're not talking about me right here, but just in general when we're doing employee investigations. Well, we're not going to invite her to the happy hour afterwards because we want to be careful. Or I'm going to stay in a separate hotel when we are at this convention because I don't want to be accused of something happening if I'm staying at the same hotel as her. So it's kind of just been grown, and you can see it on both sides. You can see how there are accusations that have maybe been a little too far. So for example, we had a complaint at a doctor's office of a male doctor who, he was a pretty big guy, and you know, they have kind of narrow entryways going into their room. So no matter who was there, he kind of would like brush the shoulder, but totally, I mean, totally the most innocent thing. And it was happening to guys and girls, but a nurse just was infuriated. And we asked her, you know, did you tell him that that had been happening and it was a problem? Well, no. Okay, well, can you do that? So this is just an example of there have been things that have occurred that have created this phenomenon, but it's also important to make sure that this is not happening, and that's why training is so important. We'll talk about the kind of training that actually is effective and what's not effective to help both genders actually know like what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, what you should be complaining about, what you shouldn't be complaining about, and also creating a comfortableness with your team that they don't have a problem saying to one another, hey, this is making me uncomfortable, I want you to stop, right? Because then you have a problem if your employee says that to another employee and they don't stop. But if that isn't happening, there's not really anything good coming if it's just directly complaints and you don't know if that employee actually had the intention of being inappropriate or not. Okay, so the EEOC checklist has put forth a leadership and accountability kind of things that you should check off to know if you're doing a good job. We like to go beyond the EEOC because the EEOC sometimes, it isn't the law. It sometimes helps create law, but their policies can be helpful. So a policy that is easy to understand and that is regularly communicated to all employees, a reporting system that employees know about and is fully resourced. You would not believe how many employees say, well, I don't know who to talk to in the company, or I signed the handbook, but I don't know what it says about sexual harassment, or I don't know who I'm supposed to talk to if sexual harassment occurs. And that's when you have employees who are skipping the whole system and going straight to complaining to the EEOC. So a lot of times in your handbook meetings, it's kind of easy to just brush through because employees are hearing about it every single year. But it's actually really important to make those trainings interesting and engaging so that it sticks in employees' minds about what they are supposed to do. And, we recommend even, in some cases, putting a common room that say, this is who you talk to for this. Just like you have workman's comp or whatever that you would have in your meeting area, it's helpful to have phone numbers and email addresses or who someone's supposed to talk to when events like these are occurring. Accountability, discipline that is prompt, consistent, and proportionate to the severity of the harassment. So it's kind of funny that the EEOC has this because it takes them a year to listen to complaints, but in your organization, as soon as you hear about a complaint, you should investigate. It should not be a month later, it should not be a week later. You should have a plan in place that day to start the investigation, to set up who you're going to talk to, and it should be done promptly. That's very important. And it should be done the same way with all of your employees. So whether it's a lower level employee in the warehouse or it is the president of the company, there should be a system put in place where they're being treated exactly the same way with their complaint. Accountability for mid-level managers and frontline supervisors to prevent and or respond to workplace harassment. So I think this was a UCIP case, but I don't quite remember. But your supervisors actually represent you. So if your supervisor says something harassing or fires someone, they are speaking for the company in that case. So your mid-level managers and your frontline supervisors, that's a really big deal that they know what they're talking about. Regular compliance trainings, we mentioned this. It needs to be regular, it needs to be interesting, it needs to stick out in your employees' minds so they know exactly what kind of behavior is appropriate, what's not appropriate, and who they are going to talk to if inappropriate behavior occurs. And then you need to have separate trainings for your managers and your supervisors. They are, the representatives of your company, and oftentimes, I would say that 90% of the time, it is the supervisor who is doing the harassing. In every single case that comes forward, it is someone with more power who is exerting control over someone with lesser power. So there needs to be a higher level of training that's being done for your supervisors to know what behavior is okay and what isn't okay. And also, sometimes supervisors will feel like they can handle a situation for themselves. So maybe they get a complaint and they're like, okay, I'm just going to talk to the employees. We won't mention it to the higher ups in the company and we'll just move on. And that is not okay. So they need to know that there's a system in place that when they receive a complaint, it goes on up, goes to the HR people, and you guys are the one handling it so that it makes sure that it's being done the same way every time. So the first step for creating this harassment prevention program is for the leadership to establish a culture of respect in which harassment is not tolerated. So you need to ask these questions. Have leadership allocated sufficient resources for a harassment prevention effort? Has leadership allocated sufficient staff time for a harassment prevention effort? And has leadership assessed harassment risk factors and taken steps to minimize those risks? I mean, as leadership, as HR professionals, you are the front lines in the company. So this company we've been talking about that, obviously shall remain unnamed, that had the religious issues with the current one, I had to fire their old HR person because she was handing out weed in the office, and she's a VP in a national company, and she was sending sexual messages and videos to employees. So obviously, and just as the investigation happened, and you could see the trickle-down effect of the HR department was just, they didn't know which way was up. And that was because the head of their whole department was, leading the way and being a terrible employee. So it's really, really important that if you especially are at the top of your HR organization, that you are setting a good example. Let's not sell, weed-laced candy or anything else in the workplace, or send sexual videos. Okay, so the EEOC says you get bonus points if you can check these boxes. The company conducts climate surveys on a regular basis to assess the extent to which harassment is experienced as a problem in the workplace. So these would be anonymous surveys that you would send out to your employees that would all go to the same place. You would not require them to put their names or anything on it because you want them to be comfortable. And there's questions asking, how often have you experienced unwanted touching? How often have you experienced unwelcome words? And there's tons of climate surveys you can find just online to create your own. But it's really good to get a feel for, is my training effective? Are employees actually listening? Are they doing what they're supposed to? So those we definitely recommend doing probably at least twice a year, one in the first 6 months, one in the second month. And it's nice if you have a training in between so you can see if that survey changed at all after the training. The company has implemented metrics for harassment response and prevention in supervisor employees' performance reviews. So it should be part of your supervisor's employment reviews, whether they have received any complaints, whether they've passed it up, and what has happened with that. And that should be part of you telling them whether they're doing a good job. That should be part of their job as a supervisor, is if they are responding appropriately to claims that are coming in. Sorry, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask, would you recommend a certain climate survey?
I mean,
just throwing one together, one that's already pre-made, or?
I can send you guys one that's pre-made if that would be helpful. I'll send it to Johnny and he can disperse it. I mean, there's just lots of questions you can ask, and you will need to tailor it a little bit to your organization to know, what would be best. But I can send a more generic one, and then you guys should, see what your organization needs are, see what issues are come up, and put that in. Does that sound good? Okay. The organization conducts workplace civility training and bystander intervention training. So a lot of times what you see is that your other employees may witness harassment. That harassment isn't getting reported, and they feel like they have to stay out of the way. They're just like, I'll let them handle it. But you want to create a culture in your organization where bystanders can complain and show that harassment is taking place, just the same as the employees who are being harassed. And obviously the importance of this is that, if someone's watching an uncomfortable situation, it makes them uncomfortable too, which makes them not do their job as well as they should. And it brings the whole company down. So I like to tell this story. I mean, I don't like to tell it, but it's an interesting story. My very first case when I became an attorney that I helped out on as far as employment went was a case involving orgies happening after hours at this company. And the supervisor, the line between what was okay after hours and what was okay during work hours became blurred. So the supervisor came up to the secretary and did a little, I don't know if you've seen, I don't even know what movie it is. It's called Tune in Tokyo or something like that. You know, where he grabbed her chest and twisted in the middle of the workday while she was sitting at her desk. And he thought that it was appropriate behavior because of this relationship he had with her after hours. So obviously, things went a little haywire after that. She filed a complaint and just found so much in the company of things that were going on because of this inappropriate after work activities. So workplace stability training, what's okay in the office, bystander intervention training, very important. And you think that I'm making these things up, but I'm not. Like one of the reasons that I like employment law is that there's literally the craziest things happen in this field, right? You just never quite can comprehend what people think is okay to do to other people during work. We also recommend there's researchers that can evaluate the organization's workplace harassment prevention efforts. I think that a lot of things can happen, with you guys doing all of the other things. I think of this more as like if things have gotten so out of hand that there needs to be something done, then you can turn to this last one. But if you're doing the ones that we talked about above, you're probably not going to need the last one. So now we're going to go to my phone with the old presentation because these were new things. So the volume of demand letters has increased. The EEOC released their 2018 statistics, and they received over 554,000 calls and emails and handled over 200,000 inquiries concerning potential discrimination claims just last year. I don't know if you guys are aware, but they launched a public portal that makes it pretty easy to submit your claims. It also makes it easier to set up interviews. Because everything online is usually easier. And so they said that resulted in a 30% increase, and they had 40,000 more interviews last year than they had the previous year, just based on that move. The EEOC website states that it secured $505 million for victims of discrimination last year. $505 million, like that's an obscene amount of money. $354 million was through mediation, conciliation, and settlements. $53.5 million was through litigation, and $98.6 million for federal employees and applicants in hearings and appeals. So those are big numbers. That is a giant increase from before the Me Too movement started. So this really is an issue that is causing a lot of problems for companies who have not, stepped up their level of training and all of that. So some new laws to be aware of. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was signed into law by President Trump on December 22nd, 2017, and it took place January 1st, 2018. The act eliminates the ability of companies to deduct from their taxable incomes any settlement or payment related to sexual harassment or sexual abuse, and this includes attorney's fees, if the settlement is subject to a non-disclosure agreement. But the act doesn't address whether if you have a severance agreement, if that also falls under there. So right now, it's only being applied to when it's just a non-disclosure agreement. And California, California, I've said this before, but they are kind of the forefront of all employee laws that trickle across the country. They're the first in line to do something. And it usually takes a bit, but they eventually do spread. But they have required mandatory training now. They have laws regarding non-disclosure. For an example, if you have wage and payment issues, and you pay your employee and you want a release, you can't do a release in California for wage disputes any longer. So even if you totally compensated your employee, you cannot prevent them from going after you again for the money that wasn't paid to them. So that's really interesting. And then they've also expanded the standard for hostile work environment, which that one you probably will see spread. So what are your responsibilities? You're going to be looking at your policies, your training, and your procedures. So best practice for your policies. You need to give actual examples of inappropriate conduct. This is where we go back to people not knowing what the heck sexual harassment is. I like a lot of times to tell, if I'm working with a group of men, I usually say, if you would not say it to your male coworker, do not say it to your female coworker. And a lot of times that works. I mean, if a male coworker is like, I hear them say, oh, I like your tie, or, say something about their shoes or something. But then they're not sure what they can say to the female employee about their appearances. And so I like to give examples to show that. You also need to consider implementing a separate workplace dating policy. So I know that a lot of relationships, I think it's like an obscene number actually, are made in companies, but it's very, very dangerous to have your employees dating each other because the line of acceptable behavior seems to go out the window when employees are dating each other. And even if they are dating, we'll have complaints of, again, after work activities spreading into the work activities and causing issues even though they're boyfriend and girlfriend. The handbook. Your handbook is very important. It is not just a sheet of paper or a little booklet that you give to your employees and call it good. You actually need to have your handbook updated. You need to make sure it's updated with laws. Employee laws are passed every year. So if you're updating every 5 years, you're going to be way behind. I'll have handbooks come to me and I'm like, how is this even possible? This is 10 years behind. You literally haven't told your employees anything. I try not to shame too much, but your handbook is very important. You need to have them sign. You need to have them signing every year. You need to go through it. You need to make it interesting when you're going through it. It's just so important. I use that that's always one of the first things I do in our EEOC response to employment discrimination is I put up the handbook, I put up the policy, and I put up the employee's signature. And then I try to do everything else that I can to show that they were actually told about the handbook. They didn't just sign a paper. Because sometimes it does look suspicious to the EEOC when you have just a separate page that's not connected to the handbook that they signed. And so sometimes they'll ask me, well, did they actually read the handbook? So, reporting. Make clear who can bring complaints. So that's everyone. Everyone can bring complaints. And most handbooks do not say that. Most reporting things don't say that. They kind of insinuate that it's only if you're the one being affected. But no, your handbooks need to state that if anyone sees any sign of discrimination or harassment or unwanted behavior, that they need to report it, even if it has nothing to do with them. Process. You need to have a process in all of your supervisors' offices, in all of HR offices, in all of your governing boards' offices about the correct way to respond to harassment claims. And again, it needs to be done the same way every time, no matter who in the company. Obviously, if it's the CEO who's having issues, there's going to be a different reporting procedure and a different process because you're going to have to use different people when it might have been, the CEO or someone under the CEO who was doing some of the investigation. So you need to make sure that that process is lined up as well. What happens if it's, the chief of police or something like that? They need to have something. Oftentimes it is the chief of police. employees, actually. So you need to have a process laid out in place for them. Okay, retaliation. You need to look at bias. So what happens when someone comes, what happens to a person's brain when someone complains to them, and what do they unconsciously start to feel about that employee? And there actually, there is bias training you can do. And I think it's very important because we create impressions about people, every time we look at them. And so if you aren't addressing that, this implicit bias that could lead to retaliation, then you're going to have issues. So training, there needs to be training for your staff, there needs to be training for your supervisors, it needs to be regular, it needs to have quality, and your leadership should be the ones conducting it. So again, if we're going to the chief of police and you're training officers about something, or just in general the staff, the chief of police needs to be there. He needs to be contributing, and he needs to be giving examples of things that have happened and what is okay and what is not okay. What is not appropriate is if your chief of police then acts out the incidents with subordinates during the HR training. So we don't do that. It has happened before though, but we don't want discrimination happening within the training. Okay.
So I'm just curious if anyone in this room or you have any advice for in dealing with elected officials who refuse to attend training. Anyone, we can't really even compel them to come to the training. Or can we?
I mean, you do everything you can to get them there, to make them understand the importance of their presence. I mean, it's also important for their jobs, because if it gets out that they are harassing someone and that shows up at the Salt Lake Tribune, they're not going to be an elected official anymore. Well, maybe they will in some states, but not in Utah, right?
It takes 4 years to get them out.
Right. They can always be impeached in some cases, though, right?
I was just curious. It's a problem.
So I know that is a problem, but I found that if you bug someone enough, then sometimes they just do it. I mean, honestly, like even if you are sending emails constantly, if there's follow-up phone calls, if there's letters, I really have found that the most difficult people have been forced to attend training because they are so tired of being bothered. So if that's the case, like obviously it's not ideal because you want to have a good relationship with the officials, but if their non-compliance and their behavior is going to bring down your whole organization, then you don't really have a choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, all right, procedures. We're looking at who receives the complaints, what happens next, what is the timeline and process for investigations, and how can we be fair and objective. If the person who is accused of committing the harassment is your best friend in the company, you probably shouldn't be involved, right? I mean, that's just how it is. You need to make sure that the person doing it is, who's laid out for these investigations, is completely outside of the realm of what the other employees are. So, we've had investigations into employees in a jail, and it will be, an officer who's not involved in the jail at all, who's coming in and doing the investigation, who doesn't really know any of the parties involved. And so, that's very useful. But who receives complaints? What happens next? What is the timeline and process for investigation? What is the timeline? What did I say earlier? Thank you. Immediately. Okay. HR, you are the front line for implementing the company's policies because your actions can make the company liable. So if you are selling, again, weed out of your office in the form of candies, you are making the whole company liable for that. If you know something, the company may begin to know it, and your failure to act may make the firm liable. So if there are harassment claims coming to you, and you feel like, okay, I don't think we need to address that, Again, when it escalates, your company is going to be responsible for your failure to implement your own policies. So you need to make sure that if you know something, that the higher-ups in the company know about it as well. And you set an example for those who work for your company. As I said, I am not exaggerating when I say that this entire HR department through the rest of the employees who thought of the HR department as a joke, it had literally was in the process of ruining this successful national company because of one person's actions. So if you can prevent that by doing your job and being an example, I mean, you don't realize the importance that you have as one person in the company until you're setting the company on fire, right? All right, so top takeaways. Culture has to change. You know, they have done tons of studies that say that when you have more women in management, that there is less harassment. At our firm, we have had our managing partner before our current one was a female, and I can say that it did seem like it just kind of seemed to change culture a little bit because you had a woman who they were seeing in a leadership position all the time. The culture has to come from the top. If your supervisors, if your elected officials, if they are all showing that they don't care about these issues, if they don't care about sexual harassment, then the rest of the company is not going to care about it either. HR, you cannot do this alone. You need to make sure that you're not just a checkbox in your company. You are actually very important in implementing policies that protect the entire company, and you need to make sure that your voices are heard in terms of policies and procedures and making sure that your organizations are following these things. It's still always going to be about policies, training, reporting, investigations, and swift action because all of that plays into the law, right? So every time I'm writing a defense for a company that has done something wrong, I'm always looking at those things because those are always going to be defenses, right? And it depends on whether you've done a great job, whether I can win my case. So you also need to get your employees to trust the process. They need to believe that when they make a complaint that their voice is going to feel heard. Even if it seems like a silly complaint, even if you find out that nothing actually happened at the end, it's still a teaching moment, it's still a moment where you can get your employees to believe that their voices were heard. Because I found that a lot of times, really, when people are having issues at work, it just helps for someone to listen to them. You know, like maybe someone did something to them that was harassing in nature, but maybe sometimes they would just like have stood up for themselves or brushed it aside. But if they don't feel like their voice would be heard no matter what, it just creates issues that can create issues in the future. And then underreporting, managers need to think of that as their problem. Like if you are not doing a good job as a manager if there's underreporting in your office. And so if you get that climate survey back and it says that, you know, this harassment is taking place and you haven't heard any complaints, like that's your problem. You are doing a terrible job if that's happening. Okay, so other lessons from Me Too. Employees are still struggling with what is harassment, and we've talked about that. And I'd be interested to hear if you guys have had examples of this where you have employees coming who are either reporting things that are definitely not harassment, or they're not reporting things, but you just hear about it that are harassment, and they just aren't sure if it is. Go ahead.
In the news last week, there was a city council, and I guess I don't know what the context was, but apparently they weren't getting along. One of the city council members, they called the other elected official, maybe a mayor, who's a woman, a sweetheart. They all voted and kicked the guy out. I don't know why, but anyway, on the news, she said, well, that's sexual harassment. And a couple days later, my wife asked me about it. This kind of goes to that top line there. So, do you think that was sexual harassment? Because I think she was trying to figure it out herself. Now you used the example earlier. Well, he probably was able to go talk to the guys on the council and call them sweetheart. But when people make, they say, hey, I think that was sexual harassment. I don't know. Things like that make you wonder because people are questioning whether it is or it isn't. And maybe the line is drawn is a little different. And sometimes a woman might bring something up and another one doesn't agree.
That happens all the time.
And then a lot of times the men, they're supervising women, and you don't want to make it a policy because you just want to make it a general policy for everybody, but they don't even want to do an annual review with door closed or without somebody else in there.
And that's
Not
the
because of
problem.
what they say or past problems, they just don't want to be in a situation where they're alone or they're having to deal with correcting some behavior.
And we're seeing that all the time. Sweetheart's an interesting one, and we'll talk about this later. This was on my other presentation, but I have it on the slides here. But there is a subgroup under harassment that kind of leads to things. It's where men unconsciously treat women differently than they treat men. So let me give you an example. I obviously am very pregnant. I'm also an attorney, so that means that 99% of the people I work with are males. So I have a case. There are 12 male attorneys as part of that case. I show up for a deposition. I am sitting at the table. The plaintiff's attorney, who is very well known in town, he's an interesting man. I don't believe that he has any malice. He just is an idiot. And so I'm sitting at the table, and he comes in, and he goes, "Mom, come here." And I'm like, "What?" I wanted to respond to Grandpa, but I held myself back. But that is an example that the rest of the deposition, every time I have seen him, he has called me Mom because I'm pregnant. So I don't know that, and everyone else in the room was a dad, so, it wasn't going both ways. But that's an example that, obviously I'm not going to, say harassment, probably next time I will call him Grandpa. But it's just an example of things that you do have to watch out for the workplace, and that's where training comes in, right? This guy's always been the head of the food chain, so he's never learned how you behave, right? And then he also sent an email. I don't know if any of you have worked with Kristen Van Orman. She's one of my partners at the firm. He sent an email to Kristen telling him he was enamored with me. So that's not appropriate behavior, right? So we'll go over that, but I totally am with you. I understand that sometimes when you hear these things, it's very, there's a different level of tolerance. I am harassed every single day, especially when I'm not pregnant. And it's just my level of tolerance and what I'm willing to stand up for, or what I'm willing to just forget about. It's very different from maybe what other women, because I've always been in a male-dominated industry, right? And maybe I'm making it worse because I don't always say something, but you will always see that people have different reactions to things. So that's why your training is so important, because if there's a difference between saying, "Oh, you look good today," after I had my first baby, a male colleague was like, "Were you even pregnant?" Obviously he would never say that to a man, but it was he meant nice things by it. He wasn't trying to come on to me. Whereas there's other times where it's "Oh, you're too pretty to be a lawyer." I'm not trying to toot my horn because I'm not pretty right now, but I'm just saying that this has happened lots, and I'm just you would never tell a man that they were too handsome to be a lawyer, right? It's only something you would say to a woman. So, I just have lots of stories, we could go on and on, but go ahead.
I think a lot of it has to do with intent.
Yes.
Sweetheart, and then something else said with it, or how many of you been to a drive-in and the person who waits on you calls you honey or sweetheart or sweetie.
Right.
Here's your order, sweetie. there's a complete different level of intent there.
Yeah, and that's where, you know, you kind of have to talk about voice inflection in your training. Like, what did someone mean? Was it an innocent comment, or did they mean more? Johnny, I think you had something.
Well, with what is harassment, I think that's something that I find common in the county policies is that you don't define what harassment is. And you make it far broader. When I come out and done training in the counties, I make sure that I identify exactly what is illegal discrimination and harassment to make sure that employees understand that a one-time sweetheart is absolutely not illegal harassment. It's not severe, it's not pervasive. So, but then I find when I get to the county's policy and talk about, now we know what illegal harassment is, let's look at your policy and see what your policy prohibits. There's still counties that say all forms of harassment will not be tolerated. So now, one time saying sweetheart is a violation of the policy. So I think counties really need to take a look at how do they define harassment and what do they make a violation of policy in their harassment policy. Have they gone too far from what's illegal harassment and what they're saying is a violation of their policy? I think that there's a middle of the road that we should be getting to there.
Almost every handbook that comes to me says, we do not tolerate harassment. Well, that's great, but what the heck is harassment? Go ahead.
Yeah, close to about 10 years ago, we were having a training in our public works facility, and our HR manager was at the time speaking in front of us, and one of my older, soon-to-retire employees got up and said, well, excuse me, sweetheart. And as soon as he said that to her, she said, hold on a second. She looked at him, and with a perfect smile on her face, she said, I'll give you that one, but I like to be addressed as Peggy or Mrs. Madsen or HR director. She says, never sweetheart. And she said it the whole time with a smile on her face, and she stopped him in mid-sentence. And I thought that was very professional of her to do that. She said, this one I'm giving you, but at this point, don't address me at that. Now, I don't think he meant it as malice. It was just, he was from that older generation, and he thought he was being polite, but yeah, I thought it was very professional on her part to do that.
Yeah, and that's, again, where you need to create a culture where people feel like they can just say something. Because a lot of times complaints aren't going to happen if people, you know, just stop it right there. Say, I don't like when you touch me. I don't like that you said that. You know, a lot of times that will fix the behavior right there because people don't, you know, always know. Like how they may refer to their wife and they feel like that's a nice way to refer to their wife. It might be very different for your female coworker, you know, who's trying to be, you know, might not feel as much of an equal with comments that are made. But again, like it has been so important to me to have male leadership in my life, to have male mentors in my life, and it would just have been so difficult if I had male supervisors who were uncomfortable, you know, taking me to lunch, to teaching me, to being there for me when I needed a sounding board at work. So if we are creating a culture where we're not talking about what is harassment, what is okay, and making people feel that they have to be careful about, you know, who they're seen with because they aren't sure what's going to happen, like that is creating a whole problem for the companies. I mean, especially in the legal field, where 99% of people are men. If I only had to depend on women mentors, like that would not be a good thing. All right, so let's see. All right, let's talk about other lessons from Me Too. Just because something happened a long time ago doesn't mean that it isn't going to become a problem now. So if you have someone come up and say that 5 years ago a woman was raped by a sheriff in your, you know, while on scope of duty, or just that it happened, it doesn't matter that it's 5 years ago. It's going to become a problem for your company. The statute of limitations is very long for sexual assault. So you need to take, this is again where you take everything that comes in front of you seriously. It doesn't matter how long ago. I mean, okay, what's the most obvious example of this in the past year of a historic claim? The Supreme Court nomination. right? That happened in college. This man was in his 50s now, and that became like a huge deal. So that is an example. You also need to be looking at different kinds of claims that are coming up. Beyond gender, you're going to have more issues regarding homosexuality and regarding gender identification. Those are becoming the next big topics as they get more protection under the law. And I don't know, it's the feeling with most employment lawyers that the Supreme Court will be taking that next step in this next batch of cases. So it needs to be on your radar. You need to also know what is criminal conduct. That should be outlined as a policy as well. If something comes and it's beyond, like rape, for example, that is criminal conduct. It's not just harassment, and there needs to be a reporting structure for, what your responsibilities are as a company to report that to law enforcement or not. Consensual relationships, we've talked about this. I don't recommend that you allow people to get at the office. Literally, I would say, I don't even know, 80% of cases are because of maybe consensual relationships that have gone wrong, or it's been a one-time thing that the other person just won't let go of, and it creates so many issues for the company. So just don't allow them. It's really hard, but I don't think it's a good idea. Confidentiality is under attack. I think in the next 5 years, will no longer be able to have confidentiality when it comes to sexual assault claims. So you need to really be thinking about how you're going to handle that as a company, whether you can keep certain things confidential or not. And you need to keep an eye on the news and in the legal field what is going on with that, because there are lots of attacks going on about how if you can have confidentiality clauses in releases for sexual assault and sexual harassment claims. And then backlash. I hear comments all the time, the Me Too movement, like, ugh, like this is terrible, like it's been a drain on society. You need to make sure that, I consider discussion about the Me Too movement, etc., to be the same thing as talking about other political organizations or about religious organizations at work. We just don't talk about those things, right? There's a billboard for the Kings of, does anyone remember what it's called? Driving down I-15, it's Kings of something. It's an all-male organization that believes that white males have been oppressed, and its intention is to put white males back onto the map. Well, a company let them have a meeting at their office, but at the same time there was discussion whether like a women's group could be held at the same office. Both are not good ideas, right? We as organizations should not be allowing political organizations, of different leanings to be having meetings at our office unless we had a totally open door that everyone can have a meeting at the office, right? So it's just something to watch out for, because it does come up. If you have like a nice meeting area and people request to use it or something like that, that's just not always a good idea unless you have a good policy about how that's going to happen. All right, there's also, we've talked about this, and again, this is going to go back to your employees know how to say no or communicate that they are feeling harassed. So these are kind of some, I have had male coworkers who have like leaned over and just unconsciously, put their hand on my shoulder when they're looking at the computer. And that, I in no way have thought that that was sexual harassment. It's just they didn't have body awareness. But, it is something that I should feel comfortable saying, like, oh, sorry, can you not touch me? You know what I mean? So it's really talking about your employees, giving them the power to do that. Okay, here are examples that you can write down for things that constitute sexual harassment. I know that there's always that one person in the company who likes to forward the joke emails. Just don't do it, right? Like let's tell our employees not to do that, because that gets them in so much trouble. Does anyone have other things they would add to this that they have found to be reoccurring themes?
Well, we put in a process that employees have to, if they email everyone at the county, it goes to Ralph and Mark to screen and approve or deny those emails. So hopefully people put that in place so regular employees can't just blast everyone emails to everyone in your department or everyone in your
That's a really good idea. And I've seen this on social media too. If you have groups for your organization where people, I mean, this is a big thing with companies now, they have groups where people can participate and ask questions on social media, and you should have admin blocks on there so that everything is approved by you. And that's, you know, protecting your organization to see what messages come out, and then also protecting you on social media because you know, your whole group can be closed down for one post. And then things that are not harassment. Hostile work environment. People use that all the time. They do not understand what hostile work environment is. Just like Johnny was saying, it'll be one thing that happens and they're like, hostile work environment. No, it is not hostile work environment because someone said one mean thing to you or one inappropriate thing to you. Like, that does not count. And your employees need to know that. I mean, literally, you get out of training and you'll ask them and they won't have a clue. So, you know, training needs to be better because they need to understand it refers to illegal discrimination based on protected class. That's all the law forbids. So employees sometimes say they work in a hostile work environment when they think their boss is a jerk. That's not hostile work environment just because you have a mean supervisor. And the conduct could still be unacceptable in the workplace, and you could report it, and the company could still decide that it's acceptable based on that company. Okay. All right, fixing the reporting problem. Reporting remains a big problem. We talked about, do employees feel safe to report? What if the perpetrator's at the top? What about serial perpetrators? I mean, you should have a strike rule in your company. I mean, I know that there's issues with due process and, you know, people who are kind of lifetime employees. I understand all of that in the government context, but there also should be rules as policies in the counties that, you know, 3 strikes and, you know, you're automatically eligible for this. And there is case law to support you with sexual harassment, you know, getting rid of employees for sexual harassment. There's more protections in a federal context than there is in a private context, right? Because you are under more obligations in a federal context to follow federal laws than private companies. Swift and appropriate responses, and if your company is starting over, if you haven't had good policies, if you had a history, like for example, if we go in and we're doing an investigation of the fire department and it just is from top to bottom, it's bad, like that's not the end, right? We can rebuild. You can change people, you can change their minds, you can teach them about what's appropriate, you can explain to them why things aren't appropriate, and eventually, a lot of times they do get the message, right? And especially if you can change that person on the top, you know, then that can trickle down to the whole company. So if you have a particular organization in your county that is giving you lots of problems, do not feel like the world is over. We can change them. All right, talking about what the company is liable for and what it knows. Who knew and when did they know? Underreporting by managers and supervisors, we've talked about how this can make the company liable. So Penn State coaching staff, I think that was like 20 years of sexual assault that the whole staff knew about, right? Urban Meyer, he was sent text messages from the wife talking about the abuse and he chose to ignore it. USA Gymnastics Organization, how long was that one going on? At least 20 years that the staff doctor was obviously engaging in inappropriate behavior. Harvey Weinstein's organization, there's lots of proof that his brother, who is his business partner, knew what was going on and just let it go. This is just an example of bystander training. And if you noticed, all those people who knew about things, they weren't the actual perpetrators, but they knew about it, they're all been fired from their jobs, right? Like Urban Meyer was the most celebrated coach in college football, and he now probably will never coach again, right? All right. Hostile work environment, who can create one? It can be anyone in the workplace. So if you have a vendor coming in who, an example of this in the legal industry would be, we have Westlaw training, right? That's our research tool. They come in once a week, they set up shop in the office, and they do their work and their training if we have questions. If all of a sudden we had a rep that was coming in and was being inappropriate all the time, like that could create a hostile work environment because he was being inappropriate and the company did nothing to stop it. No, that hasn't happened. Westlaw has been very good. But I'm sure everyone has some kind of vendor that occasionally comes in and is inappropriate, and that can make your company, that can create a hostile work environment for your company. You condone a hostile work environment if the company does not stop it, and you play a critical role in stopping it. So again, if a complaint comes to you in HR, and you don't say anything, or you say that it's okay and it's really not okay, you're in effect under the law condoning the hostile work environment. But again, the company can only stop it if it knows about it, right? So that's why you need to know about it. All right. So a lot of industries are having policies and procedures that require companies that they work for to have those kind of procedures. And you're actually seeing that more and more. Just like you're seeing, there's a lot of even clients in the legal industry that won't work with certain law firms if there's not diversity, right? So it's a similar thing with sexual harassment. It is okay to require a vendor that you work with to make them prove that they have a good policy, because that can put your company, make your company potentially liable. And then this is an interesting one where companies are making their policies public. Facebook does this. I believe Google now does it. I think that a lot of the tech companies in particular are usually ahead as far as social issues go, and they're doing it. Okay, public claims. If you have someone in your organization that's going to go public, or it's something that gets leaked to the news, and that happens a lot in government, right, where it comes out in the news, you need to have a plan for how is your organization going to respond. You need to be sending a message. We take this seriously. We have a policy in place. We are investigating it. We will take action if appropriate. A follow through. You can use a PR expert if needed. And it's also, I think, important to have a message, where you're innocent until proven guilty, right? You're not going out and saying, like, I take this message very seriously. We will do everything we can to investigate this, and, the truth will come out. But it's not wise to, when these things are released into the media, to be like, this person is definitely guilty, right? And that happens a lot too, where it feels like a company has already turned their back on an employee who's accused of something, but then the employee, like, nothing actually happened. Okay, here's more examples of historic sexual harassment and or assault. Bill Cosby, I'm pretty sure that happened. The accusations against him were from like 40 years ago, right? And he just went to trial as like a 79-year-old man. Of Peyton Manning, I hate to think that Peyton would do anything because I'm a big fan, but again, it allegedly occurred when he was 19. And then Justice Kavanaugh is the biggest example. All right, watch for lawyers to get creative. This is an example, the Chubb Insurance bringing the lawsuit, asking the court to declare that it does not owe Harvey Weinstein coverage for the litigation under the liability policies. The New York Attorney General filed a civil rights lawsuit against the Weinstein Company for not protecting its employees. As the law changes, as these issues become more mainstream, there are new legal claims that are being created, right? I mean, there might be certain tort and, you know, concepts in the law, but you can actually really just say you're suing for anything and fit it under something, right? And that's what's kind of happening. All right, here's what you should know about criminal conduct. A company should contact the police if criminal conduct is alleged and the police have not been contacted. And the company should be cooperating in the investigation. All right, we've gone over this. See the numbers, what I mean? That's a large amount of people who are dating in the workplace. All right, a big thing that we see is that your employees' after-work activities bleeding into the workplace. I mean, what are some ideas that you guys have had in order to prevent this? Because I know that it happens a lot, especially in the sheriff's department, because we do all those investigations about what's going on. So, what are you guys doing to kind of keep that line and keep policies in place? I will give you swag. Nothing? You're not doing anything? Go ahead.
Well, we, of course, have mandatory harassment training every year, and we make sure every employee has that training. They have to sign off on it. They do quizzes on it to document that. It actually has helped in one case that we had just recently. He was a new employee. He had taken the training. As a new employee coming on, we require the harassment training as part of their new employee orientation. He had taken it then, and then we have it every January. We have the harassment training again. And then in February, he was accused of some just comments and so forth. But anyway, he was still kind of on probation, so it was like a slam dunk deal. We terminated him. But because, and mostly because we had those harassment trainings in place, and he had signed off on them, he had taken the quizzes, he had gone through all of that and everything. So we make sure that is one thing that we do every year for sure.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, you guys strong and healing first aid kit. This is just really impressive. Just pass this down. It actually is really cool. I have one of them. But so training is great, but in the training you need to be specific. You need to be talking about what is the workplace. What's your social media policy? Your dating policy, private events with coworkers. I mean, a lot of times coworkers are friends. They're going to go out to eat or drink afterwards, and that's when issues come up. What kind of text can you send? What about social media? Okay, I have no time. Okay, so this is an example. I don't know if you guys want to just take a picture on your phones. The war on confidentiality clauses, all of the issues coming up. California, I believe that they actually had this, again, I made this a year ago. I had a new updated one for you, but I believe California has considered prohibiting confidentiality clauses, but that's actually become not just a consideration anymore. Washington State just prohibited non-disclosure agreements. So Microsoft eliminated forced arbitration, and now since Microsoft has done that, you now have Google, you now have Facebook, and there was one more big company that no longer has arbitration for their sexual harassment claims, and that was a really big deal as well, because that's opening up their companies. I mean, usually arbitration awards are a lot less than lawsuits, so. This is an example of comments that I hear all the time. I mean, we've got a lot. So, avoid extreme responses. This is a funny one. My pen says later to remove this photo order from table until wife arrives. As a HR person, as a hire from the company, as a mentor, avoid extreme responses. Don't stop going to, activities with your female coworkers. Just use common sense, right? All right. So unfortunately, we're out of time. I've used up a lot of time. I apologize for that. But if you want this PowerPoint, you can email me, and I'll send it to you. It has a lot of good things on investigations, how you should be doing them. And this is my, let's go over this real quick. The economic cost of sexual harassment. Morale obviously suffers. You have people who don't want to come to work, people who quit work. You have turnover. The cost for replacing an employee varies from 50% of an employee's annual salary up to 400%. Guess what? If someone's coming in as a lateral instead of being hired straight out of college, which one's going to cost more, right? Low productivity, and then ultimately no claims against you. According to a 2016 report, employers paid $699 million to workers alleging harassment through the EEOC's pre-litigation process going back to 2010. So if you can compare that, so that was over 6 years, that was that amount. We had over $500,000 paid out in 1 year last year because of the rise of these claims. Added indirect costs such as lower productivity and higher turnover, sexual harassment allegations could be staggering over time to a company. A study from 30 years ago estimated that the average Fortune 500 company loses $6.7 million per year due to settling sexual harassment claims. And if that was the figure from 30 years ago, imagine what those costs are now. 21st Century Fox paid out $45 million in the first quarter of 2017 to settle allegations of sexual harassment. So this is an issue. Here is my email and my direct line. If you have any questions, please ask me and email me if you would like the PowerPoint. And I'll send over a climate survey to Johnny to send out to you guys. But thank you very much for having me today.
So just thank you very much, Jessica. We're going to go ahead and take a break. We're scheduled to start again at 10:15, so if you could just hold it to about 12 minutes so we can stay on time for the schedule today. But there have been some additional snacks that have been brought in and refreshments from the hotel, and we'll start up again at 10:15.